today's session in the Philosophy with Scholar series. This is Himanshu. I will be the host for the session today. We, Team Let's Talk Tattva, extend a cordial welcome to everyone present here. We are a philosophy discussion forum that has been trying to take philosophy beyond its conventional spaces and modes towards simply the act of philosophizing itself, in whatever shape, form, place, or genre we might discover it. While we are at it, we would like to thank our audience who has been a source of inspiration for showing up for our initiatives for over 3 years now. Hopefully, our spirits and consequently our endeavors too will only intensify in future with your presence in future monthly discussions. Anyway, we are back again with a much awaited talk by Dr. Kalpita that was originally scheduled for 24th August 2024. Before we begin, here is a brief overview of today's session to help you navigate the talk better. At first, our speaker would present their ideas and argument for 40-50 minutes. After they finish the talk, an invited discussant, for now Nishok G U, will respond to the arguments and theme of the talk by discussing their questions or comments in the next 15 to 20 minutes. Following this, the forum will be open for Q&A with the audience. Everyone is welcome to put their questions and comments on the table either by raising their hands to get unmuted and ask the speaker directly or type them in the chat box. And now that you have already relinquished your Sunday cat nap to gather for this philosophy discussion, let us also request you to turn your video cameras on and join us in welcoming our speaker and discussant today. Welcome, Nishok again. So, the topic for today's talk, as you all know again, is Phenomenology of Accident, a reminder for the ecological reality of human beings. When I first read about this topic, I was confronted with an unfamiliar feeling because instead of sharing yet another insight about human life, this talk draws our attention towards a strange and much ignored truth of human mortality as the basis of our coexistence with the nature that speaker calls the ecological existence. This unsettling feeling throws into panic an average human like me. It is the ecological truth of human death or killability, as Dr. Kalpita terms it. Here is the brief overview of the idea of the talk. As I quote from Dr. Kalpita's summary in the sense, the imagination of the Sunderban is very much associated with the charismatic species Royal Bengal tiger, which at the same time presents us with an image of man-eaters. This predicament, human inhabiting the same habitat as the Royal Bengal tigers, leads to inevitable accidental hostile encounters between humans and tigers. This talk focuses on what these accidental encounters with a mortal threat in the specific context of the Sunderbans reveal to us about what it means to be human, particularly in the nature of humans insofar as we always coexist with the other species. This talk will elaborate on phenomenology of the accident, which is an attempt to show how islanders form a relationship with this fellow creature. The term accident indicates human-animal conflict in the Sundarban Delta. The phenomenology of accident reveals that the acceptance of human killability, which is an ecological truth of human beings, is slowly but surely vanishing. The current way of handling accidents in the Sunderbans forests brings a shift towards thinking about the forest as a resource and not as a place for humans to dwell. This shift hampers the traditional multi-species justice framework observed in this delta, along with a more than human care towards other beings. Now, this was about the talk. The speaker will say that without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Kalpita Paul, who is an assistant professor of philosophy and also an assistant dean of School of Liberal Studies at BML Munjal University. Dr. Kalpita has completed her PhD from Manipal University in environmental philosophy and was postdoctoral fellow at IIT Bombay. Her research interests are engaged philosophy, environmental philosophy, and Heidegger's phenomenology. Her recent monograph, now also available on Amazon, titled Ecophenomenology and the Environmental Crisis in the Sunderbans towards a Community-Based Ethic, offers philosophical analysis of the environmental crisis in the Indian Sunderbans drawing upon phenomenological narratives. It nuances the present understanding of the crisis by introducing plurality in our metaphysical understanding of the environment and epistemological understanding of the human-environment relationship. Our invited discussant for today's session is Nishok G U. As we have in the updated schedule, Kalpita's talk will be followed by a conversation on its content and related themes with our invited discussant, Nishok, and an invited discussion for today's session is currently pursuing his PhD at the IIT-Delhi. He works on environmental philosophy. He's also an editor at The Philosopher, a UK-based philosophy magazine. Before we begin, we also want to thank Professor C.B.K. George, himself a Heideggerian philosopher, for helping us connect with our speaker today. Over to you, Kalpita, and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, the team Let's Talk Tattva, for arranging this and organizing this very encouraging forum to talk about my work, and I'm looking forward to the discussion as well. Let me share my presentation to move forward.
Yeah.
Can you see my presentation? Not yet, right? Can you see it now? Is it visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, so as Nishok gave more or less the background of this work is part of my recently published book on Sunderban, and this is a very before I go to the nitty-gritties of the work and the theory and everything, I would like to focus a little bit on how did it all begin. Means why Sundarban? What is my kind of motivation to work in this area? Because my engagement with Indian Sundarban began not as an academic endeavor. I have first explored this land as a development practitioner. So, as Himanshu also kind of pointed out that I practice engaged philosophy. So this sharing the background will also help the audience to understand what I mean by engaged philosophy, which is a quite a niche field at this moment in India and academia, I would say. So I first encountered, or my first encounter with Indian Sundarban begins as a development practitioner, and I visited several islands to know how these islanders live their livelihood opportunities, stresses, and how they cope with these climate change-induced disasters. As a practitioner, I also embarked on doing community work that supposedly helped them living a life in a more sustainable way. However, this almost 4 years of immersive engagement with the Indian Sunderbans and the islanders there, I soon realized is that more than the inhabitants of this delta, outsiders have much more claim and say in this region. This understanding kind of led me to explore this region academically through research to comprehend its global and regional significances and tensions. So that's how I that's how my encounter with Indian Sundarban as an academician begins. And now to move on, I don't think I need to give a lot more context about Indian Sundarban, but just to give a very preliminary or very brief, and I'm sure everyone here means accustomed, know about this region and its ecological and biological significance. But just to give you a sense that Indian Sundarban is a cluster of low-lying island in the Bay of Bengal that straddle India and Bangladesh. This delta is formed by Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna river. Among these three, Meghna flows only in Bangladesh, but while the other two rivers flow across India and Bangladesh, it is a 40,000 square kilometer young delta region and is also world's largest delta. So now, if you go to the literature, if you try to understand Sundarbans through literature, through the discourse around Sundarbans, we find that two facets of this delta. The first, as a vulnerable landscape due to rising sea level and climate change which pose threat to climate change induced disasters. And the second, as a magnificent mangrove forest home to charismatic and endangered species. One of it's obviously the Royal Bengal tiger. As a result of what I also find from my immersive engagement with the Sundarban is there is a effort to create certain kind of boundaries in this region. What I mean by boundaries, so there are global agendas which like to protect and preserve Sundarban forest for its ecological diversity. And because of this global agenda, there is a certain systematical attempt to make Sundarbans a different kind of landscape. Now I will explain a bit about this boundary creation. So there is a constant effort to make this region separate land from water or forest from village. You see the last 15-20 years of development, if you follow in Indian Sundarbans particularly, I will talk about, there is a huge massive embankment creation is happening to for creating a safe place for human inhabitants of this place. On the other hand, constant stringent rules and regulation are in place for which kind make people inaccessible. The forest may become inaccessible for people. So there is a very strong and stringent boundary gets created between land and water, forest from villages. But simultaneously, there is also there is certain kind of erasal also happen. What I mean by erasal of boundary. So if you again, I just these are all general knowledge about Sundarbans. If you little bit follow about what's going on in that region. So if we move to the erasal of the omission of boundary or erasing of boundary, what we'll see is that constant effort has been made to create or erase the boundary between island and mainland. There are bridges, there are infrastructure has been made with the focus of which focus kind of connecting these islands with mainland. And with this kind of erasing boundary, what also happens is that the islandness kind of gets erased and the memory of living in an island get erased slowly but surely. I have detailed this process and the need of doing this kind of development and its implication in my book. But here in this talk, in today's conversation, what I will mostly focus on the boundary creation between village and forest and how that has, what kind of process it follows and what is the implication of that. So what we need to remember here is that there is a kind of long memory of life and livelihood or ways of life in Sundarban. Uh, there is an inherent tension between the process of creation of boundary with the way of life that is appreciative of the liminal character of Sundarban. A simple question, if we ask to an islander to know their livelihood, it is common to encounter an answer that is indicative of multiple livelihoods as per the seasonal changes. A person will say that I do farming in this season, fishing in this season, or I chose to do seasonal migration as well. So no one will conform to us idea that I am a farmer or I am a fisher. This is very unusual in Sundarbans kind of terrain. People choose and do certain or choose and adopt certain kind of livelihood as it is given by the time and the season and the land and from the landscape what they can gather. So a composite term of doing forest is indicative of that is not a livelihood per se. So there are many people who will say that I just in Bengali they will say that jungle kora or doing forest. I just go to forest. And what it means by doing forest is not a livelihood per se. It's a way of life that the islander adopt. And the fishing, honey gathering, crab collection all depends on the dwelling in the forest. And the dwelling emphasizes that islanders being is intertwined with this liminality of the delta. Doing forest always reminds them of the temporality of life and death. In the same manner, this delta possesses a temporality of land, water, and forest. Now, as islander goes into the forest and adopt a forest-based livelihood, collection-based livelihood practices, um, there is again this is a memory which says that forest is a place which which also home for other living creatures, not only for human being. So they also encounter different kind of threats in the forest, and accident, as I mentioned in the as my talk also kind of on the base of this term accident. Accident in this island refer to an event when a person lost his or her life in the forest due to tiger attack. Losing life in the forest, be it due to tiger attack or snake bite or crocodile attack, is not an uncommon event in this terrain. The question now to ponder here is that then why particularly tiger attacks are termed as an accident? Accident is an unintentional event that happened by chance. The unintentional property of it takes away the agency from both the party involved in an accident, and there is no blaming involved. Traditional forest dwellers neither blame themselves for the accident, following the terminology of government regulation that they are the trespassers in the forest, nor the islanders blame the tiger for these attacks. They never call tiger as a man eater. They have a different terminology to call tiger, which is mama, and in again in English translation, mama will be a maternal uncle. So you will say that there is a very different kind of relationship building process with tiger, though Royal Bengal tiger is infamous for its character of man eating. So as soon as this human tiger conflict gets termed as an accident, there is an acknowledgement of uncertainty and misfortune. From the islanders' part, not blaming the tiger is an indication of acknowledging and accepting the right that non-human animals have in the forest. Not only an ethical sharing space, but also it is deep recognition of one of the relationship that these animals have with humans is the predator-prey relationship. Framing this death incident as an accident tell us that these islanders inherently have developed a multi-species justice framework where each flora fauna has their right in this delta, and particularly they admire tiger as a fellow inhabitants of this island. Being human, often we forget our killability. Being killability, if we just try to understand this term, being killed by other, as we find ourselves in a superior position from the rest of the animal kingdom. This forgetting gives rise to a justice framework where human life has the highest value. However, in the Sunderbans, these islanders possesses an equal relationship with the tiger as they fight with the tiger for their lives and encounter the killability of human life faces in a terrain like the Sunderbans. The term accident thus erases the blameworthiness and reminds us of our authentic vulnerability that we are trying to curtail as much as possible through adopting a modern way of life. Srinivasan 2022 puts forth for multi-species justice framework to take place, it is necessary that we reanimalized humans. One of the significant reanimalization is through accepting the risk, mortal threat of being killed.
Tanu.
It brings a paradigm shift in our thinking as we see humans are not only with the power to kill other animals, but also equally exposed to, to the killability that exists in the other animal life. The term accident thus emerges out of a philosophy that is entrenched in living in the forest, where people in their everydayness encountered this killability and the existential threat. However, along with its ethical bearings, the manner in which the present political ecological system address the accident is indicative of a certain kind of institutional system that is misfit to the ways of life followed by the islanders. Due to this intervention, now accident also captures the moment of a sudden breakdown. A way of life that was followed by the islanders for generation breaks down due to the conceptual induction of accident in governmental rules and regulation. The phenomenological narrative, now I'll go into the phenomenological narrative part a little bit, which will highlight that this situation of breaking down is not because of tiger attack, but because of the associated events that emerges after the accident. So, just to give you a methodological underpinning of my project, I have employed phenomenological research method as a way of engaging with this with these islanders and their life and ways of life. And in this case, the phenomena was doing forest. And okay, just to again, there are a lot of students here, so for them perhaps it will be interesting to them. So doing forest is a experiential activity. It's not a problematization mode. So is a phenomena is just an experience that that an individual encounter in everyday manner, and they can talk about it. So doing forest is a phenomena to understand one's relationship with the forest and as well as one's relationship with the other living creatures in the forest. So in this phenomenological interviews, there are few themes comes up which help us to also understand how this accident or the conceptual induction of accidents create a rupture or create a kind of breakdown in the in people's mind and in islanders' mind, and kind of create a different account of accident, which is completely devoid of the traditional ways of thinking, I would say. So the first thing which comes up is the tiger preservation and rate of accident. So as we know, since 1970 onwards, preservation of Royal Bengal tiger has become the heart of the Sunderbans conservation program. So tiger has been patronized, and the state has given in the highest priority in the Sundarbans. So there is no question that Royal Bengal tiger needs to be preserved in Sundarbans ecology. And at present, in the core area, the number of tigers has increased significantly, and there are a lot of technological, or I would say biotechnological intervention happen for this kind of increment in the tiger population. And to accommodate this increase, there is a constant expansion of forest, which takes the access of the forest away from the islanders and creates a tussle between the fellow inhabitants. Both due to core area expansion and tiger preservation program, the rate of accident has significantly gone up. There are old or aged forest dwellers who are doing forest almost for 30, 40 years in this region. They have also kind of acknowledged and kind of reported that nowadays, if you go to forest, the chance of encountering tiger is so much so that it's create a kind of of hindrance to access forest for the forest dwellers. Because they always, even though they go for forest dwelling, they always try to keep a safe distance, or they always try to kind of respect the boundaries of the other fellow creatures. But these boundaries nowadays is very difficult to find out or to kind of respect, because of this constant expansion and the increase in the tiger population. One of the major source of the second thing comes up, and that is one of the major source of at this moment conflict in Indian, when it comes to human tiger conflict in Indian Sundarban, is the body for the last ride. What this means, the accident takes place mostly in the core area, which is prohibited for islanders. But as per the islanders' narrative, the boundary between core area and buffer area is so meandering in nature that it almost becomes impossible to identify in the forest. They say if the right side of the river is a buffer zone, then the left side is the core zone. So it is not like islanders always sneak through the core area. They do the forest, they go to the forest and do their chores in between buffer and core zone. But if the accident happened, it becomes difficult to convince the forester that they are not the trespassers. One of the main points of contestation between forest department and islanders is for getting access to the core forest to bring back the body for the last ride after the accident. Following the same institutional logic, people who met with an accident in the core zone or whose body is found in the core zone, they don't get any compensation as well. The third theme which comes up is the traditional rituals, state regulation, and resource scarcity. Forest-based livelihood as a traditional practice that involves a lot of uncertainty, follows traditional rituals to negotiate those uncertainty. Practicing these rituals as per them reduces the threat one is exposed to while dwelling in the forest, particularly that of encountering tiger. However, now maintaining these rituals and obeying the outcome of that practices, uh, outcome means that whether to enter the forest at a particular time or not, that is the outcome I mean, are becoming difficult. On the one hand, there is a limited access to the forest, and that in turn is giving rise to a pressure to get the best out of the forest within the given time frame, and thereby it is becoming harder for villagers to obey traditional practices entirely. On the other hand, women who carry the burden on them of giving everyday meals for their children are not also able to obey the traditional practices and had to enter the forest to get fish and crabs, which earlier used to be easily available in the mainstream of river adjacent to the village. So the resource scarcity also kind of forced people to enter into the forest region. The older women in the village expressed their dissatisfaction towards younger women who entered the forest without obeying traditional norms, not entering during their menstruation. Earlier, women used to do not to go to the forest that much. It used to be the men's place. Men used to go. Now, women are going all the time, and the forest is also place for a goddess Bonobibi. The goddesses of the forest is, as per the old woman account, the goddesses of the forest is getting offended, and for that only this accident has increased. God also cannot do anything if we do not obey what we should do. That is the account from older generation. We also heard about how Gunins take the final call of whether the forest is safe for enter or not. So Gunin is a person who kind of do a rituals, traditional rituals, and the worship of Monobibi as before any group or any team get into the forest. And traditionally, the Gunin takes the final call whether the forest is safe for the group to enter, and here safe means whether the tiger is in the vicinity or not. But nowadays, even Gunin say no, the forest dwellers or the team doesn't have much um, agency to not to go to the forest, because they perhaps have got the license only for 5 days and they have to go and work at that moment. So that is the one of the major challenges, the if you think from the how traditional rituals and practices used to make this make give them certain kind of certainty, and which these forest dwellers nowadays are losing, and they are going into the forest with an anxious with certain kind of anxiety which used to not be there in the previously, if they could have followed their traditional practices. Okay, the third theme comes is the vulnerability of not third theme, sorry. Fifth one is comes the vulnerability of housewives. So stringent regulation and legal nitty-gritties in recent time, working men of the village are migrating to other cities, even other states. Now it is upon the woman who stay back in the village for taking care of the family. They, on the one hand, take care of the household chores, on the other hand, ensures enough means to feed the children and aged members of the family. Many times, married women become obliged to go for fishing and crab collection in the creeks adjacent to forest. Even though most of these women belong to Sunderbans region, and they are not at ease with fishing in river and going to the forest for fishing to meet the demands, because usually what happens in the in for a family is that before marriage they never go to the forest. They remain in the they do other kind of household chores, but going to the forest becomes an adult affairs. So but as soon as the marriage happens, they becomes the adult and they need to take care of their family, and they have to embark upon embark into the forest and do certain kind of forest waste collection so that they can run their family. So this kind of pressure, without knowing the skill of how to go to forest and how to dwell in the forest, make these housewives more vulnerable. The next thing which comes in the in the phenomenological narrative to talk about their relationship with forest and how that is changing is that landlords increasing dependency on forest and increasing vulnerability. What's happening in this region is that because of sea level rise and other kind of natural disasters, villagers are losing their farmland or even houses. In case one loses a house or adjoining land, the person is not left with any other choice but to convert her farmland into a house or habitat or a residential plot basically. As a result, villagers' dependency on forest is increasing. They are left with two options, either to pursue forest-based livelihood or to migrate. Oftentimes, this compulsion to go to forest without having necessary skill set makes them vulnerable. And it's constantly happening because of every cyclone, cyclone, the embankment gets collapsed and the farmland gets washed away by salt water. Then because of the land loss and what happens is that there are not much option for people to continue the kind of livelihood they used to pursue as a combination of farming and fishing. What happens is because of land loss, they need to move either to the forest-based livelihood or they need to migrate. And oftentimes, the men of the houses migrating to other cities, be it Kolkata, be it in other states, and women stays back, as I just mentioned in my previous theme as well, that women stay back and they take care of the daily requirement. And mostly at this moment, women do the forest-based collection and gathering, collection and livelihood practices more than the men. The last thing, what I would like to uh, give you a sense, and which is again very important to the human animal conflict part, is that lack of courage, skill, and vulnerability. From the villagers' end, there is a constant strive to take up livelihoods that do not require them to go to the forest. And this is not only one way of operation. Forest is becoming kind of inaccessible for villagers. Day by day, it's becoming stringent to get access to the forest. Stringent rules and regulation coming to place. And on the other hand, there is a shift in the good life definition, and forest-based livelihood always been seen as a not the desired one. So there is a constant move from or constant attempt to move away from this forest-based livelihood. So people are running engine vans, running shop, or cultivate or going to a cultivation of fish and crabs kind of practices instead of collection based method. And they are migrating to other cities. Obviously, that is another option, another very common phenomena in Indian Sundarbans. So parents are always keen to say that their children will not take up any forest-based livelihood option. So there is there is an attempt to change the life or ways of life in Indian Sundarbans, and the definition of good life obviously is changing. What's happening with that? The forest dwelling skill are slowly fading away. But when people are pushed at the to take up those kind of forest-based livelihood. I'll give an example of COVID-19. When they went back to Sundarbans, when the migrant laborer came back to Sundarbans, they didn't have any other option but to go to the forest and meet their daily requirement. And we have seen that because of lack of skill and lack of their knowledge of how to dwell in the forest, the human animal conflict shoot up that time, and there are a lot more news about accident was coming during the 2022 2021 from Indian Sundarbans than the other time what we received. So as a result, what is becoming is that survive it is becoming difficult to survive an accident. Earlier what used to happen is that you encounter tiger and you fight back, but here this fight back option is kind of collapsing. The survival rate is really poor at this moment. So now let's go to the next idea, that how accident, then this idea of accident, it's becoming or creating a rupture in our thought. Accident creates a rupture in everyday experience of islanders. Islanders, in their everydayness, always used to keep in mind the uncertainty that exists in doing forest. Their cultural practices, starting from worshipping Ma Bonobibi to various restrictions that applies to women for not to enter to the forest, or the way wife practice certain rituals like not to comb hair or not to put vermilion while their husband is in forest, tell us that islanders appreciation and acknowledgement towards this uncertainty. Many families have experienced the loss of the near and dearer ones in the forest. If they and often they kind of hold accountable that this kind of traditional practices is not getting not being practiced as it should be, and because of that this accident kind of happening. However, in recent phenomena of the accident is different from the past event. Accident poses a question mark in their everyday mode of being when islanders could not perform the last rite of the body, or they hear that other members of the group could not help the individual who has been attacked by the tiger. So in Sundarban, the villagers have kind of shared stories where people never left their team member. If one person gets attacked by tiger, they fought together and they came together either they could kind of save the life of the person, or perhaps they might not. But the fighting together or being together in the forest is a very, I would say, basic principle they have been kind of following in that region. But what's happening slowly is that, as I mentioned, that the loss of courage is becoming very prominent now. If tiger if one person encounter a tiger in the forest, or while they are fishing, the other members suddenly feel kind of kind of I would say uh, an an attempt to flee from that place. They don't have the courage to fight back, and this not being together in the forest is kind of challenging the entire ethos of forest dwelling uh, principle. So. mm so this kind of internal tension is kind of changing the relationship among people, as well as the changing their relationship with the forest. So if a woman lost her life in the accident, the question arises whether the woman maintained the norms before entering to the forest, or she had compromised on those parts to ensure food to her family. Makes forest immediately present as a standing reserve near resources. So they are entering to the forest to get food out of food, or get resources from there. So islander began thinking of maximizing utilization of the resources without putting their life at risk, or they think of how to replace the forest resources with other available options that offer them certainty in life and reduce the risk of accident. So there is always a comparison, the what best option available, and if there is no best option, no other option available, then only people are going to the forest with the compulsion that they have to kind of bring back the maximum resources from the forest. So this kind of mentality is a new way of thinking about forest, and also this kind of mentality doesn't match with the memory of forest dwelling community that we have seen. I have discussed a little bit previously. So drawing from Heidegger's discourse on thinking, 1966, we can see how calculative thinking operates in this case. So calculative thinking help us to manage actual pressing problem at hand, which in turn makes it possible to sustain our engagement with the Sundarbans forest and preserve the way forest is meaningfully present in the Sundarban as a place for tiger, or a protective cover for that safeguard village from cyclone, or give a resource for everyday food requirement. So the phenomenology of accident makes it clear how forests stands apart as an individual entity distinct from the life and living in the Sundarban. Accident in the forest changes the relationship between the islander and the forest and makes it hard for islander to negotiate with the system that control the forest. So here we can see is that how from accident, which has been coined to kind of acknowledge the uncertainty, now it is gets translated as a, if the accident happens, there is some wrongdoing involved, there someone is not following certain kind of norms, and for that only accident is happening. And this kind of change in the value system, what is happening immediately is that the forest is not the place for human to dwell, not the place for human to get engaged within the forest. It's a resource base. It's a standing reserve. It's a resource base from where one can exploit the most. So it is a so there is a kind of alienation from is happening through a victim based narrative. So if the if a person lose their life in the forest, they become victim of tiger attack. And as soon as this kind of victim based narrative gets played out, there is alienation from the forest and the way of life where integral part of that life. So forgetting about there is a kind of constant attempt through the induction of this accident in the government rules and regulation is that for the constant I would say that the existential vulnerability that was the part of this kind of way of life and the acknowledgement of those existential vulnerability as human species kind of getting erased again. There is a process of forgetting of those existential vulnerability. On the other hand, as discussed, access in traditionally how the forest dweller used to use the term accident, it is an ethical framing enables the islander to be truthful to the Sunderbans ecology, where human co-live with other flora and fauna, and particularly the Royal Bengal tiger. Instead of adopting a victim-based narrative, it helps in reflection and appreciation of existential vulnerability of human as a species, sharing the same planet with other species that can threaten us. The approach towards forest here not merely as a resource but as a place that nourishes human and non-human and sustain our survival. Moreover, an acknowledgement of forest as a place where human life encounter its killability also gets pronounced. The phenomenological account of accident highlights the vulnerability of the vulnerability human species face in a natural environment. The forest as a location sanctioned the killability of humans, and thus being killed there never become a question of crime or intention, and it is a luck and chance factor. Not being killed in the forest is also associated with the blessing that islanders receive from Ma Bonobili, the goddesses of the forest. This perspective tells us how islanders acknowledge their social status of being killable, and their safe return is considered as God's blessing. Unlike these modes of being, in today's world, our societal effort to make ourselves safe and secure through creating a space where we can control and dominate nature and non-human beings historically helped us to forget our killability. Also, it takes us away the ground of faith on the God and who blesses us. As soon as this killability surfaces in the modern world, our entire attention goes towards finding the agent whom we can blame for the circumstances. We have seen during COVID-19 pandemic as the virus threatened or an eagerness to find a blameworthy party become a stronger sentiment. The ethical action towards other human at this kind of sentiment suffer. Accepting our killability becomes a moral challenge for human species. On contrary to this prevalent thought, in the Sundarbans, the very naming of the tiger attack and loss of life due to accident emphasizes the killability of humans and makes us same with our fellow creature on this planet. It portrays that islanders possess a strong sense of sharing the land with the fellow creatures on earth. It also indicates any clashes is not a motive to harm the other, but a chance event. However, the recent trends of accident and the phenomenological narrative highlight that the thrust on chance factor is reducing. Why? With the state imposing regulation, the accident is turning into a symbol of unmanaged risky activity, where those islanders who are partaking the risk are getting blamed for the accident. There is always an attempt to find the scapegoat, be it legally or culturally. This tendency towards accident problematizes the killability aspect of our existence. It negates the morality of killability that, as I argue, adds a new dimension in the multi-species justice framework. The phenomena of accident thus creates a rupture in the thinking of islanders. On the one hand, through the prevalent legal and developmental narrative, it problematizes the sense of being killable and egalitarian approach of space sharing with fellow creature. It immediately evokes the calculative thinking that categorizes forest as a non-dwelling place for humans, a place where non-human being has a greater right than humans, and a place that offer ecological service to human society. However, at the same time, the phenomena of accident presents an opportunity to see forest as a thing with a diverse meaningfulness. If we consider forest as a thing, following Heidegger, we can say that the thing is defined by the relationality of what he terms as the fourfold. How the fourfold of earth, sky, divinity, and mortal are gathered in the thing. Now dominated by calculative thinking, we commonly appropriate a thing either as a tool or a consumable or a manipulable by tools as a means for our survival. Within this realm of thinking, the thing, as Heidegger characterizes it, as this one or that one, is covered over. For example, if we consider the way accident is portrayed now, we can see how the mass management drives the forest management strategies. The forest department manages each forest with the same rules and regulation to ensure legal framework is in place. Driven by the goal of achieving homogeneity, this kind of management strategy perceive every forest as the same, and in the process, it categorically ignores the essence of the forest. Accident becomes a threat to this management as it highlights the failure of the management. Thereby, as soon as accident takes place, the managers are cautious to find out the scapegoat, and in doing so, rules, norms, regulation come to the forefront. Islanders' custom, ritual, and humanistic demands fade away in front of those rules and norms. Thus, forest loses their spatial attributes and their gathering essence of human being for human being as part of historically meaningful world. Contrary to the present narrative of accident, the fundamental reason of terming the human animal conflict as accident indicates the spatial and temporal characteristics within which the relationship plays out. In this realm of relationship, in which a forest and non human creature exists, gets its due priority, and it shows how socio-cultural embeddedness of forest and non human fellow beings. And in turn, from this gathering of relationship, I believe the essence of forest can be realized. The sky and the earth of the offer the vital energy, sunlight, rains, fertile soil, and nutrient, and nourishes the forest. Forests become the site of sacred where goddesses, in this case Ma Bonbumi, resides. In some cases, forests itself become sacred, and the idea of sacred groves in India is quite prevalent in this way. Forest is the source of life for mortals, and here mortals are both humans and non-humans who rely on the forest for their subsistence. The primary idea of accident acknowledge and appreciate these four aspects of forest together: the atmospheric condition, the landscape within which holds the forest, and in turn gets shaped by the forest, the sacred values of forest for their cultural salience, and the life of human and non-human that thrives alongside or in a forest. All these facets come under the purview of phenomena of accident that enable us to take the first step towards realizing forest as a site of gathering. Perhaps we could see how, through the interplay of fourfold, forest acquires its meaning and its existence. With embracing the original idea of accident, we can make our first move towards bringing this gathering in the light. Eventually, this acknowledgement challenges the prevailing calculative mode of thinking, and thus occurs a rupture in our thinking about forest. So, what are the key takeaway? Now, just to summarize, I think I don't have much time. So, the key takeaway here is will be the idea of accident, which kind of appreciate the killability aspect of human being, add a new dimension to the multi-species justice framework. And the phenomenological account of accident creates an egalitarian ground of interaction that negates human supremacy. The second key takeaway I would like to highlight here is that accident as a rupture in our thinking enables us to appreciate the forest as a gathering of fourfold and its excess. Forest is not merely a place where non-human being can dwell, or where human being access the ecological services. Forest is a place where human encounter their different their part of their self, I would say. So here, to conclude, I would say at present our involvement with Indian Sundarbans crisis happens through the question like how to resolve the crisis and who will be the responsible for this crisis. Even when we think of forest and human animal conflict in the Sundarbans, the same question emerges. We never attempt to understand what is the meaning of the crisis, or what is forest and what is the nature of interaction between human and non-human in the forest. Therefore, the existential truth of killability that always already present remain hidden. Furthermore, it disconnects forest, the theme, from human being. Islanders' ethical framing of human animal conflict as accident introduces a space where we can think about forest in a more conceptual manner with an appreciation towards multifaceted justice and dynamic relationship of fourfold. Indeed, the potentiality of forest, which continue to be veiled until now, plays an equally significant role in realizing the essence of forest that emerges out of the relationship between human and animals. To engage with this, the islander as well as the outsider must also keep themselves open toward the mystery and the potentiality of forest. Uh, Thank you, and obviously, I will now looking forward to hear from Nishok. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kalpita again. Thanks, Edo. Now I think without further ado, we can have Nishok in conversations again.
Thank
Over
you.
to you, Nishok.
Yeah. Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, Kalpita. This was a really fascinating talk and a really fascinating piece of work. I enjoyed engaging with it. I'll probably keep my questions up to about 15 minutes. Is that all right, Himanshu? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then sort of we can open it up for others. I'm sure others have more interesting questions than I. Yeah. So I think I'd like to start with some sort of modest caution as to where I am coming from. So I do not work in this tradition of philosophy. I work in more analytic tradition of philosophy. So that is one step I'm already removed from Kalpita's kind of work. And second, Kalpita is also doing this engaged philosophy research, right? So again, I fall into more the armchair, more sort of working with the text and thinking about the text and so on. So I'm doubly in some sense removed from actually doing this sort of work. But let me try and actually pose some questions that I had while engaging both with the paper as well as the talk. So I'd like to, I think, begin where you began in terms of actually understanding this engaged philosophy research method a little bit more. So, I mean, I typically understand how typically philosophy research sort of goes about, right? Like working with texts and sort of thinking about it. But in your sort of this engaged approach, how do you sort of go about the research? Maybe you can sort of break it down, because I think that will be a lot more useful starting point to begin, right? So what is your day-to-day like? Because it also involves ethnography, there is reflection, there is philosophizing, there's a multiple set of aspects. So yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned ethnography, so I'll completely kind of try to distinguish the attempt here to distinguish between ethnography and the engaged philosophical approach,
Right.
and particularly the phenomenological research methodology, what I have adopted. So, engaged philosophical approach, as I briefly said, that it's a more bottom-up approach, right? You first immerse in a field area because of XYZ reason. It cannot it you it might not be a research field area. It's an area where you are immersion, you are engaging with some certain other reason. For me, I engaged in Sundarban because as a developmental practitioner. So I never thought that I will do research on this as well.
Right.
So, but as one in kind of immerse himself in that kind of context and try to learn from what's happening there, how the life and life of people there, how people's value system is, how people's worldview is. From there, perhaps we can see that our research question is emerging. The research question emerges from the field, not from the literature. So for me, the research question was that why there is a tension between outsider and insider, why insider voice is not being given priority, and why Sundarban is completely taken over by the global agenda. That was my kind of means I find that is a departure point. So, uh, so, so as we can say that this is a bottom-up approach, and then when there is a research question, where is a question which motivates me as a researcher, I enter into the field of research. I see that okay, what is the literature says, what is the discourse around that area or that issue. Now, how I differentiate ethnography from phenomenological research methodology is that phenomenological research methodology gives complete importance to the experience of an individual. And it's a first person account. It's not a group account as well. It's a very first person. So I have interviewed almost 35 individuals from 3 different islands. And from that 35 individual, usually if you do a phenomenological research methodology, 5 to 25 is the range where you get a saturation. After that, you see that there is a repetitive account or repetitive insight is coming about the phenomena, whatever it is. And in this case of doing forest is a phenomena. And phenomena is different than, as I said, is not a problem at the from the beginning. Doing forest is a phenomena, is an activity, is an engagement what individual kind of take it forward in their everydayness. So they talk about that experience. They don't talk about human animal conflict as such. I'm not asking them about human animal conflict. I'm asking them about their experience of going to forest and how they're maneuvering in the forest land. And from there you see these kind of themes are coming up. So so phenomenological research methodology actually helps also to understand that how mundane activity gives insight about the problem or the bigger challenges what we are talking about. So this is the difference if I can highlight a little more. And obviously, because phenomenology has a complete philosophical underpinning, after getting the thematics or the insights from the phenomenological research, you might find a bigger pattern from the narratives, and that helps to make sense of the work world of the narrators. So that work world gives you the philosophical understanding of the place, philosophical understanding of the issue at hand. So issue comes much later. Phenomena is the departure point. Experience or getting the insight from the experience is the first layer, and then from there the thematic and the issue and what. Obviously, I came at the fag end also. I spoke about how the relationship with the forest gets kind of is changing. How the human-animal conflict is this entire account give a different insight to the human-animal conflict as well. So it's pronounces the worldview of the people and the philosophical underpinning of those worldview, I would say. If that makes sense. If you have follow-up question or if anyone has follow-up question also, I'm happy to. You are on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, no, so when you're capturing this phenomenon, so you said the issues and the thematic sort of come. So the distinction you made between phenomenon and problem. So first you sort of work with the phenomenon, then you sort of take it into the more typical sort of philosophical work that we normally do in terms of actually trying to draw out the patterns, trying to sort of link it to, I think you used Heideggerian sort of framework in order to, I think, make sense of okay, but I think how does it how does it differentiate itself from like a more anthropological kind of framework, right? So where does the more philosophical sort of angle come in as opposed to, so that's, I think, the question I had. Yeah.
So anthropological framework is more like how means if you go by participant observation kind of framework, right? Means what we do in participant observation. As a researcher, I am observing something, right? I am um, observing the how the people or community where I am doing my research is engaging with XYZ thing. It can be their culture, their livelihood, their and trying to make sense of by conversing. But here it is completely, I am not interpreting their work as a researcher here. The first way is just to listening what they are saying about their everyday manner and their everyday work world, how they are making sense of that. So doing forest as, so if I try to kind of go for the participant observation mode, then I supposed to work with them in the forest, right? I supposed to work with them in the forest and observe how they are doing things. But here observation is not the key. Here listening is the key. You listen the way people are talking about their life world. What kind of relationship they are foregrounding. It's not my interpretation about their relationship. What kind of relationship they are foregrounding. What kind of engagement, or what kind of in between space they are kind of bringing in their when they're trying to comprehend their everydayness in the world, right? So it's very difficult for a researcher, particularly if you do something like doing forest. People find it blank. Means it takes time for them to articulate what it means to go to jungle and talk about that. When people go to that kind of reflective mode, then only the pre-reflective, they're trying to comprehend their pre-reflective mode of being, basically, through when the interview is happening. And it's more about listening, not observing. It's a self-reflective account of their work world or their life world that gives you the philosophical narrative. From there the philosophy begins, I would say.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's a good sort of segue point into talking about the more philosophical aspects of your paper as well. I was curious to sort of explore some of the wider implications of the ideas that you touch on, right? So starting with the very framing of the accident of the tiger attacks. So how do you think, let's say, this framing of the accident where there is no blaming as such, either on the part of the tiger or on the part of the dwellers, because both sort of occupy that space in that very egalitarian, multi-species kind of way. Uh, how do you think, let's say, do you think this sort of an idea applies to other environmental issues beyond, let's say, human-animal kind of conflict contexts? And how do you think it might play out there? Let's say in the case of climate crisis or species extinction or whatever it is, the whole range of, or was this very contextually sort of developed, or very context sensitive in that sense? Or do you think the idea can sort of travel to other sort of environmental issues as well? So
So the basic idea here is the killability, right? Killability is a way of reanimalizing human species and rethought the notion of what is a secure good life for humans. So climate change led climate catastrophes cannot be considered as accident, because it is a product of an Anthropocene era, which is in turn a product of a value that accept human exceptionalism at the first place. So, but the turn towards reanimalizing can challenge the anthropocentric value. And thus, all the arguments regarding, if you think from nowadays, what are the discourse around climate change is coming up, that ecological limits, right? Different kind of ecological limits like planetary boundaries that are grounded on those kind of limits. Actually, again, are grounded on the grounded on human use of earth resources. So how much human can use, how much human being has a access. So that is the limit we are trying to draw. So engaging with ourselves by critically analyzing our need and desire are one way of rethinking about ecological limits. So this approach, I would say, can take us away from the blame game, that who have got already so much access to the ecological resources or ecological space, and who needs to get access right now. So that kind of blame game, which constantly, that kind of negotiation which we see or constantly happening in the discourse of climate change, or how to negotiate in the era of climate change across different countries. So that kind of blame game, we can move away from that kind of blame game. But obviously we cannot say that climate change, we cannot say that okay, climate change and the climate change induced disaster don't have a cause, or it's there is a no there is a no means there is a no one who can find you blameworthy. So that's the difference. So idea is to not to take away the blame, but also to, if I'm just contextualizing, or I'm just kind of expanding the idea of killability or idea of blame in the context of climate change, what where it can be useful is that this kind of negotiation, this idea of ecological limit, which is becoming so prevalent in the when we come to the negotiation table, right? And but here again, humans use becomes the prevalent point. We foreground the use of how much resource earth has for human use. But can we think about our need and desire? One way of rethinking about our ecological limit instead of ecological limit of planet.
That's a that's a really interesting insight to sort of turn the lens upon us as opposed to sort of having it open. I mean, just a quick comment on the killability aspect, because I had this hunch when I was sort of exploring that idea as well as also listening to you. So environmental philosophy as a field has been invested in developing this very non-anthropocentric kind of ethic, right? From sentientism to biocentrism to ecocentrism or whatever it may be. But there is, in some sense, in all of those frameworks, there is an implicit assumption that it is the human extending moral considerability to sort of all these other creatures, as opposed to human as being one among the other creatures. So in a sense, this aspect of killability, which is, I think, missing from all of these debates, could be an interesting and a radically different starting point for actually articulating a new kind of non-anthropocentric ethic, is what I was thinking, because in some sense, it removes the human from that sort of pedestal, and then sort of brings us down to that level of, let's say, other species. So yeah, that was one sort of thought. I mean, do you have any sort of what do you think about that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, actually, right. Means Kritika Srivasan, who has coined this idea of killability, I'm borrowing from her mostly. And obviously, in her paper, she, she showed that it is a missing puzzle in the entire phenomenon.
Right.
We are always thinking that what as a human we can do, as an ethical being, what we can do for others, non-human. But
Right.
we are not seeing ourselves. Where we are remain constant with non-human, where we are remain constant with animal kingdom, is that if we are if we encounter them in a space which is not quote unquote manipulated by human society, then we see this killability. Then we see this encounter of, okay, I am in the same plane with another tiger or another animal. And then this idea of man-eater. What do you mean by man-eater? Right? It's a predator-prey relationship. Why suddenly we problematize this idea of man-eater? Right? We are problematizing given the first place that safety and security matters for human being.
Right.
tiger has ample other things to eat. Why they are coming to us? So that's the way of thinking, right? So killability, obviously, we want to kind of get away. Get means human society is constructed the idea of development, idea of good life in a way that we are constantly trying to forget about this idea of killability. But in the day and age of climate change and environmental disaster and environmental means a catastrophe, it's very becoming difficult to move away from this idea of killability. Now it is a time for us also to kind of engage with this existential threat and see that what is our limit, what is our ecological limit. So that's, I think, a very, very interesting insight which comes from Srinivasan, and I just extending that in different contexts. Yeah.
One last question before I sort of move on to the Q&A. So let's say when we accept this scalability, we sort of leave this blame, responsibility, guilt sort of framework. But what sort of ethic are we then stepping into? Right. So you sort of briefly mentioned, I think it's the next chapter in your book, the community-based ethic, but I didn't sort of get to engage with it. So maybe you can sort of nicely bring it all together as to where does this leave us in terms of, let's say, an ethical framework or a or an ethical sort of viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, again, yeah, in my book I have mentioned, and I'm trying to give us framework there as well. But here I would like to highlight two things. One is that what is a community? Usually, when you think about community, it comes that a human community, right? Suppose a fishers community, a community of honey gatherers, a farmers community. But what this farmers community actually entails? Is it only human being or the other farmers? Or is it in for fishers community, for honey gatherers community? What is this community entails? Who are the part of this community? And if you go to the account of, again, if you bring the phenomenological account of honey gatherers to understand their work world, we can see that this community is actually more than human community. Here, tigers become a very, very important part of the community. Honey, obviously, means forest, land, river, all this becomes an important part of community because those are the ecological disposition which helping their work world to sustain. So this community-based ethics is not only talking about the community of honey gatherers, the material basis of the community of honey gatherers, basically, they are talking about. So this community-based ethics is a more than human community where material basis of a human community gets kind of foregrounded. And then if we understand as a community member, if we understand on what ground we are sustaining our community, obviously the ethical action towards that community or more than human community, we will try to, because it's our interest. The self-consciousness and ecological consciousness comes together. If we want to sustain our community, we need to sustain our ecological disposition. Otherwise, if a means I just mentioned about the eraser of boundaries, right? Constantly infrastructure gets built and bridges gets built in here to kind of connecting island and mainland. What happens with that is that the community of boatmen collapsed. There is no river. Even if there is river, the idea of boatman is no more there because people can move without getting help of boatman. The material requirement or materiality of having a boatman community completely collapse, right? So then boatman obviously needs to move out from their community. There will be no boatman community anymore. Once every bridges and everything can connect mainland and island. So this is the idea of community-based ethics. Now, if you want to survive a community, if you want to sustain a community, the material basis of that community needs to get sustained. The culture of boatman, the being a boatman, if you want to see that this is my being, this is my being, a being of my existential being, then this self-consciousness is connected with that eco-consciousness where river gets priority, where rivers means river is the taking care of the river is taking care of yourself, basically being a boatman. So that's the idea of community based ethics here, where more than human community. and the ecological ground of any community gets foregrounded.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Nishok, for
Yeah.
engaging with the work.
Yeah. Himanshu, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. No, these were really interesting questions. Now let's open the forum for others to ask questions or comments. You can directly come and speak, or maybe, yeah, it's better to speak instead of putting questions in chat box. Yes. Seems like something is.
Himanshu,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
can I should have been the last one to say anything here because, as I said, this is not my discipline. But the topic and the lecture was so fascinating, so interesting, and it is a truly, I think, a multidisciplinary area of work that Dr. Kalpita has done. And I'm specifically interested because I happen to belong to Bengal and I can understand many of the things that she is talking about. And I have a friend who has done work on Bon Bibi. She's presently teaching in Presidency College. And so there is, so, you know, one can look into history here, one can look into anthropology, one can look into environmental science, one can also look into literature, the heart of darkness that she goes into, and the changing nature of this heart of darkness that she's talking about, that this talk is all about. But I was just interested in two things. One is, can I look at the sea, the ocean, the same way as you have seen the forest? In the way the fishermen look at the sea and the relationship there. That's number one. Number two, I'm a little intrigued that both are epics, major epics, where where you are going to the forest, both in Ramayana and in Mahabharata. The forest is not seen as a place of where one can get killed. It is not because of the forest, but because of other things that are there in the forest, the demons or some other things. But not, there are no tigers or snake bites or anything of that kind happening in both the epics, where these, and in fact, the forest is seen as something, a nice place to stay. May it be Panchavati or wherever the Pandavas go. It's a very welcoming and a nice place. So I'm intrigued with the idea that how does the forest, what is the relationship between colonization and this new definition of the forest, which becomes a boundaried other place, which is dangerous and which one needs, which is where one can have accidents and things like that. And the third thing is, I have a friend who's a scientist, who's a genetic scientist. He keeps telling me, Ki, Nirmalia, human beings are unnecessarily proud of themselves. The viruses will live. You just cannot kill the virus. The virus kind of mutates and transforms itself overnight. You try to kill it in a petri dish today, tomorrow it has become something else. That's why we had so many variations of COVID. Every time you tried to kill it, it became something else. He says human beings will get killed in a fortnight, or even less. And we have no need to be so. So, human pride and the philosophical position of the human being thinking that he will not be killed at all, or he cannot be killed, or he's the master. This master and slave relationship of that the humans have evolved over the last maybe 500 centuries or more is something I think that we need to look more philosophically, like you have done. Thank you very much, Dr. Kalpita, for this very interesting lecture.
Thank you, Professor Nirmalya. I really admit all the comments you have given. Yes. So, sea or ocean, yes, I have in my book, I have 2 chapters on that relationship. One is about phenomenology of land and land eaters, where I talk about how the embankment is kind of creating a different ecological means creating a different ecology in Sundarban and what that means to islanders' relationship with sea. and then again phenomenology of land waterscape, which is kind of way of saying that Sundarban is a liminal land waterscape. You cannot say it's only a landscape, and this land being a young delta, it's a very thirsty land, so it needs sea to kind of for ecological reason, for its development, for its ecological development. So yeah, means the fisher's relationship with sea, the honey gatherer's relationship with ocean, some account comes in those two chapters. Perhaps you can see that for little more
Except except that, ma'am, your book costs 11,000 rupees on the
yeah,
Amazon.
yeah, I know that.
so,
It's
so
yeah, I mean, yeah, and only Indian version can come after 18 months, which is
okay,
I
okay,
need to wait for 18 months if at
we
all they
will,
need.
we will, we will.
So yeah, so that's but
But the preview is available if you want to go through. I'll send it maybe.
Thank you,
yeah.
Himanshu. Thank you.
And the forest, yes, means you are so right to point out that the way we define forest, the way our even today, the entire forest policy, forest regulation gets framed. It's a colonial legacy. The entire idea of creating boundary for forest region comes from the colonial idea of how we can maximize use of forest for taxation, and then all the threats associated with forests. Because okay, if we create a boundary and make a place only for human inhabitants, then all the non-human beings goes to one place and gets kind of their own, create their own home. So that's divide itself is obviously a colonial attempt. And again, in my book of Place and Replace, there is a chapter on place and replace, where I talk about how the Sundarbans, this forest and human settlement boundary, gets created during the colonial period, and what is the implication of that. And yeah, means the way we constantly talk about forest and human animal conflict in the forest, it, perhaps traditional memory is not like that. You know, forest is not only remembered for the human animal conflict, it is remembered for human self. Means you can explore your other self in the forest, which is not perhaps present in a human habitat area. So the different ways you can explore the self can goes to your ecology. Perhaps one's ecological self gets more pronounced when they are in the forest. So yeah, so this colonial legacy and the way we are carrying it forward through our different laws, regulation, and the same kind of political ecological structure, it's need revision. And we think, I don't know when it will be possible, but it's obviously need philosophical and more, I would say, humanistic engagement rather than only sociological and scientific engagement. Forests need more humanistic engagement. Yeah, thank you for your engagement and comments.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks. Now we have Soumya as well, of course, a speaker for the first session in this series. Soumya, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I hope I'm audible. Thank you, Kalpita. It was very interesting talk, and yeah. So what I was thinking is that so we talked about movement of humans from a less restricted area to a more to more restricted forest area. I was thinking of another side of the coin. I also come from Uttarakhand, so it's a place where human animal conflict is seen very often. And in a very interesting case, I'm studying here at IIT Kanpur. So there is a leopard that has been spotted at IIT Kanpur. So we on a very daily basis receive emails about its movement. So there are also cases where tigers or animals are also moving to the less forested areas, or what we call the so-called civilized areas, or to human dwellings. Now again, the problem here also, as I think of it now, seems to be the creation of boundaries, where we have created boundaries that this is a place where humans live and this is a place where animals live. But yeah, and what we are basically trying to do is we've also isolated ourselves, we've also alienated ourselves, whereas on the other hand we're also trying to demystify nature. So on the one hand we're trying to isolate it, alienate it, make it the other, and on the other hand we're trying to expose it, dig it, mine it, control it, and not respect the mystery of nature, so to say. So yeah, I would like to know what you have to say. I mean, in such cases where one of the reasons why animals are also facing this problem of crossing the boundaries, or I don't know, like you said in the beginning, that on the one hand we are creating boundaries, but on the other hand we are also erasing the boundaries in many ways. So yeah, what do you think? So again, the so-called forested areas from where the animals are moving are not so restricted uh, forests, the kind of cases that I am talking about, where they are moving to towns and villages or to more human settled areas, because the human settled areas are continuously expanding, and also there is encroachment to the forest lands. So the animals are also not left with any options but to move to the areas they would not be seen few years back.
Yeah, so this gives me a good way to juxtapose the condition what is in Indian Sundarban versus in other places. You know what's happening in other places is that perhaps you see the expansion of city, expansion of urban area, and taking away the forest place, right? And then there is a constant attempt to create the boundary for forest so that this expansion from one-sided expansion doesn't happen and it engulf the entire ecoregion, right? In Indian Sundarban, it's little bit different because Sundarbans is always being seen as a place where animals and forest and ecology gets more priority than human beings. So expansion of core area, expansion of forest area is the norm there. Then expansion of village area, right? Means human settlement area, and now this movement, what you were saying, from the forest to non-forest area movement for animal, there are ways in which they're trying to curb it. You see, in one of the picture I have shown that nets, right? So they have constantly putting nets across river boundary and the forest boundary so that this kind of movement they can curb. But even after that, also we keep hearing about the tiger comes into the village area and all this thing. It's interesting the way people rationalize it. People who are living in the Sundarban rationalize it. You know, if they say that foresters are constantly trying that so that animal tiger doesn't come to our village. So it is now our duty not to go to the forest. If we don't go to the forest, then they will not feel threatened and they will not come. So this kind of logic they comes back that okay, so there is a distinction institution government is creating, let us respect that distinction and not to bypass that, not to overrule that distinction, so that we also remain safe, they also remain safe, they also need their place. So it's not only creation of boundary as an institutional mechanism, it's also creation and boundary in people's mind, right? And once that boundary gets created, every time when we cross this threshold that okay, we are moving from this side to that side, or animal moving from that side to this side, it's become a blame game. Why the animal is moving, we are not going there? Why human is going, animal is not coming there? So it's become a blame game instead of thinking that this movement is a organic movement. We cannot carve out this movement how much ever we try to build up. Means if we want to carve out, we have to really put concretes and then perhaps that kind of movement we can stop, but not for every animal, not for every animal. We can perhaps stop for big mammals like tiger, but snake, other animal, still they will come and we have to live. And this idea that living with the non-human beings, which we are constantly curtailing in our ways of thinking about our ways of living. Even in today's today at our home, if you see certain kind of small insects or small creature come to our flat, we try to shoo them away, and you say that no, we need to sanitize this space for ourselves. This constant attempt of sanitization, I think that's kind of creates a hindrance to explore our ecological self, and that takes us away of our understanding of killability. And for that only I'm saying that accident as an idea kind of creates this rupture in our mind. We are killable in this kind of region, perhaps in a city area also. Think about in this way: are we really trying to getting completely? Can we avoid our killability? We cannot, right? In Delhi high road, anyone means any car accident can kill us, but that becomes a different. If tiger attack kill us, if a leopard attack kill us, it becomes a news. Why so? Why in the human society we have created that if a non-human attack creates a human or cause the death of human being becomes a news, but a human attack or a run over because of car driving becomes an usual affair. So what is the conception of good life? What is the conception of security, certainty in our mind? That's something I'm trying to highlight as I'm saying that acceptance of killability. Perhaps we are accepting killability in a different context, but we are not accepting killability by other animal because we think that we are the superior one. No one can kill us. If anyone can kill us, is the technology or the other human being, not a different non-human creature. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you, ma'am. If you permit, we can take one last question by Ivan Iyer. I'll read out. Yeah. Uh, Ivan says that he has two questions. I read. I was wondering about how the notion of accident has changed and or transformed among the people indigenous to the Sunderbans. I assume that amidst the tiger conservation effort and the framing of indigenous humans as potential encroachers on the forest and their being legally culpable with regards to their encroachment of the space of the tiger, has the use of accident now become a legal requirement or obligation. Also, do they use the word accident, or is it a translation that you are using? Only asking because the use of this word or the other words in other languages might shed more light on the politics around the philosophical problems that you are highlighting with respect to changing scenario in the Sundarbans. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, there is no translation. They use accident. So this is again very interesting to note that the exact word they use, and I tried to see from when it started, means just to going back to and tracing from when they started using this word accident, but there was no answer as such. They are saying that we always referred this as an accident. So that's something to, perhaps I would say again it goes back to the colonial time when this human tiger conflict gets formalized as a risky affairs, and colonizer perhaps use this term accident, and from their narrators also borrowed, but they borrowed in a very different way, different with a different worldview. So that's something to keep in mind. uh, how that has changed, how yeah, so with the legalities, what happens is that now accident is not a chance event, as I have mentioned in the lecture, also kind of trying to highlight is that this idea of accident as a chance event, as an event where which can happen in a forest place or forest region, and we need to accept the human capability. That kind of idea, that kind of approach is changing as accident is getting inducted in governmental rules and regulation. And if there is an accident, now there is a question of who can be blamed for that accident, and what we can what is the consequences of that accident, whether the family lose the license for going to forest, or whether family get the compensation or not get the compensation. So those kind of rules and regulation come to the forefront. So there is a they always, so any human animal conflict or tiger human conflict in Indian Sundarbans region always been referred as an accident. And then there is a now also, I don't know about the legal requirement as such, but once they referred as an accident, they try to say that whether this accident happened in the core zone or the buffer zone. If it is a buffer zone, then the victim gets little more empathy from the government, and if it is a core zone, then victim gets the blame for going to the core zone. So that's the change, I would say.
Thanks. We have one more hand raised by Nazifa. Nazifa, can you be little quick and then we can manage, I think, because
Yeah,
it's...
sure. I can take Nazifa's question. Yes.
Thanks.
Hi, Kalpita. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I'm looking forward to reading your book from the library at the university. We have ordered one of the copies, so I think I'm quite fortunate. I want to go back to the point you were making earlier about the core and the buffer zone. So, since I also work on liminal spaces such as yourself, and it's very hard to demarcate places, especially land areas, because it's strictly accurate. So how does one do that? Is it a changing definition? And how do the inhabitants sort of keep up with these legal definitions that are laid out by the government? If you can just shed light on that, I'll be very grateful.
That's the main contestation in, when the accident happened, right? So uh, obviously, whenever the core area expansion happen or the change in the core and buffer zone expansion happen, foresters or the forest officials notify the people who are going to the forest, and they kind of give the sense that okay, these are the buffer zone, these are the core zone. But as you know, in this kind of liminal landscape, rivers course act as buffer and core zone. River doesn't follow the buffer zone and core zone, and if the islanders are taking their boat through river, they are actually crossing a buffer and core zone, or cutting across buffer and core zone. And so it becomes very difficult. In one of my in one of the theme, it came up in the phenomenological narrative, it came up is that the most challenge they find is to identify what is the core zone and what is the buffer zone. And whenever there is an encounter of tiger in between space between buffer zone and core zone, and the tiger takes the body to the core zone perhaps after the kill, it becomes almost impossible to take the body back, get the body back from the forester, because they become the trespassers and they don't get the right to get the body back for the last right. So this is a huge tension among community, and it becomes very difficult. There are certain signage they use, but again, it's anything is not enough. Because of this, the landscape character is meandering, and they need to navigate it. And the right side is core zone, left side is buffer zone, and once is navigating across river, it's become almost impossible to follow the core and buffer distinction when they are in the forest as such. Yeah, I think you will also agree, it's a constant point of tension. In a
Right.
land-based forest region, it's very easy. So you have a core region and then you have a buffer region, and there is very much the demarcation is very prominent and very clear there. But in a land waterscape deltaic region, this demarcation becomes very difficult. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Maybe we'll talk further on this. I don't
Sure,
want to
sure.
take up more of the cases. Thank you so much.
Thanks for attending.
Okay. Do we have any questions or something now? Comments? No. I think we should close it now. Thank you so much, ma'am, and thanks to everyone for joining us. This is just to uh, tell you that next month on 15th December we will have another session with Professor CBK George, Professor of Philosophy at IIT Bombay, on doing Western philosophy in the non-West. So also stay tuned, and we'll inform you about further details later. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you. Let's Talk Tatva team for
Thank you.
coordinating this talk and having this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Himanshu.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Himanshu. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nishok, to you also, and all those who asked really interesting questions and made it. I think we thought that earlier we used to have speaker sessions and then general question answers, but I think when someone puts a lot of effort to say something, then we should be someone ready with questions so that they can receive that the effort they have put into. So maybe this was an experiment to have a discussion to also. We will try to see that we can continue this, keeping discussions in the lecture further. Thanks,
This is a
Nishok.
very good. This is a very good format, actually. Because they start the conversation and then
Yeah.
conversation flows. So having a discussant is a very, I would say, someone is prepared with some kind of question, which helps
Right.
the other also to come
Yeah, and
put
Nishok
their
was
thoughts.
really
Thanks,
kind enough
Nishok,
to
for
accept.
putting your time and effort to engage with the question.
My pleasure. Yeah. So,
Bye, bye, everyone. Yeah.
thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.